Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, a formal welcome to Think Different Tanya. This is, you know what, I wish I knew which class this was. I'm thinking it's lesson 21. It's either 20 or 21. We'll find out. By the time we publish this, we'll look back at the other one and we'll see what number we're up to. But we've studied Tanya for a little bit now. And what we're focusing on, just to give kind of like a bit of a refresher, reminder, what we're working on now is to develop our emotions. And I think I always try to start with this idea because it's so fundamental to Tanya. Like if you ask somebody who studied Tanya before, like what's it about? What's the main idea? You wouldn't be wrong if you said the main idea of Tanya is that we're all going to struggle, unless you're a tzaddik, but I mean, whatever. We're all going to struggle. You and I, we're all going to struggle. It's going to be a fierce battle, lifelong battle. You and I, we have the ability, even though it's tough, to do the right thing. We have, even though inside there's a voice, there's a soul, whatever you want to call it, that pulls us, tries to pull us into the negative place, we have the ability to overcome. That's like the core of Tanya. But that evokes the notion of going against the way you feel, right? Swimming against the tide. You want to say something not nice, you have the power to stop that and to say the nice thing. You want to do something not nice, you have the power to go against that and nonetheless do the right thing. The later chapters, which is the sections that we started at, are all about how to align the emotions with our newly discovered white knuckling behavior. Now that we're forcing ourselves, yeah, yes, Mark is saying the core is that we have two souls, exactly. But why is that important? I mean, so therefore what? Therefore, life is and what are these two souls? Yin and yang, right? One is pulling up and one is pulling down. You have two souls, two operating systems that are working against each other. And who's in the middle? Us, right? So we have the ability to go the right way, even when we're also being pulled in the other way. But again, the later chapters of Tanya, the latter chapters of Tanya are all about how to align the emotions with the newly embraced positive behavior. In other words, step one is knowing that there's a struggle and still doing the right thing even when you don't feel like it. Step two is starting to feel like it. How do we start feeling like we want to do the right thing to make it easier? Think about it. What's more sustainable? To go against the way you feel for the rest of your life, or to try to little by little, feel your way into, get yourself into feeling better, at least about, it's still going to be a struggle, but making it a little bit easier. It's kind of like, I always like the example of a rubber band. Oh, here we go. I have a mask in front of me. One of the kids' masks. It's got army fatigue. No, way too tight. Okay. So, but this has elastic. Oh, I see what's going on. It's tied to make it smaller for the kids. So I always think of elastic, right? So if you hold it on one side and the other side, and then you start pulling it, you create a lot of tension, and it's tight. And that's how that's us, right? Godly soul, animal soul, and each one is pulling, and we're stuck in the middle. So there's tension, stress, anxiety, right? Literally, it's stress. Life is stressful. Life is a stressful condition. So the Alter Rebbe says, notwithstanding the pressure on one side, you can still pull back on the other side. Great. But now we're saying, how do we alleviate the tension? How do we, it's never going to go away all the way, but how do we move it in a little bit, right? So it's not being pulled so tight, a little bit less tight. So we're trying to develop emotions, a love for God, a respectful awe and fear of God. Not a negative fear, but a respectful, a reverence. That's a good word. A reverence for God and a love for God. meditations, ideas. And this is the theme we've been speaking about the last few weeks, so forgive me for repeating it, but I think it's important that we're all on the same page before we launch into the new material tonight. We said a few sessions ago that there's a shortcut. There's a shortcut to trigger your love for God, your emotions for God. And what is it? Think about how much amazing stuff God has done for us. I mean, it's like the person who's in a terrible place and the king himself comes down to the dung mound, right? Whatever it's called, whatever the English was, the translation was, the pile of dung, and rescues this fellow from a terrible situation. So imagine how grateful that fellow would be to the king. And now the king takes him into the palace, into the innermost chamber, and showers affection upon him. How much would that love be? And so the message is, that's us. We were in Egypt, God saved us, and we should feel that love. So you don't need a lot of meditation. You just need to open your eyes, you and I, and the moment we realize how much God has done for us, we'll be in love. And then we ask the question, fine, but that happened 3,300 years ago. What have you done for me lately? And we explained that, no, God, by taking us out of Egypt, and then step 2, giving us the Torah is the ultimate liberator. It allows us at any moment to be free of materialism and all the stuff that can trap us in a negative way. Torah gives us the insight to lift outside of that trap. And so to lift, not live, to lift up outside of the trap of materialism. So today, Hashem, God has given me an escape hatch. God is rescuing me from my meitzarim, from my constraints, from my narrow spaces. God is liberating me by having given me the Torah, which I can access at any time. I open up the Torah and prayer, and I'm transported to another reality. So that's what God does for me. How could I not reciprocate with love? That's the idea. 2 weeks ago, last week was Thanksgiving, 2 weeks ago, we started chapter 48. And in chapter 48, he talks about God's kindness for us every single moment, not just with the Exodus, 3,332 years ago, and not just at the giving of the Torah, which also happened back then, although we're still using the Torah or studying the Torah, but it still happened back then. The Alter Rebbe is trying to say how every moment of every day, there's another act of God coming down to the place of lowliness and giving us life, giving us blessings. What does that mean? So this is where a lot of Kabbalah comes in. And let's welcome Susan. Susan, welcome. So this is where we have a lot of Kabbalah. And we started this, again, 2 weeks ago in our last session. The Kabbalistic understanding of existence is not that we take existence for granted. Well, things exist because they're meant to exist. That's not how it works. Things exist because there's a force that's constantly making it exist. The nature of reality is not to exist. Only God exists. Only God is true existence. Everything else is created existence. And the way it works, again, this is a major axiom in Kabbalah. The way existence works is that it's constantly being re-energized, reimagined, re-projected from God at every moment of every day. Literally every moment, there's another wave of energy flowing into the world to keep it around, which means, by the way, that the life that we have in this moment and this moment and this moment is none other than God's gift to us right now to keep us going, which means that we are like that man in the parable, in the analogy, who is in a place of despair and is being rescued by the king, showering this fellow with love. And God is doing that right now by virtue of the fact that we exist. God is giving us the greatest blessing, the blessing of life. Because life is not something that exists in a way that we can take it for granted. It's not just life and death, life is short, so we should appreciate it. It's more than that. It's every moment life is being recreated. No, life is being regifted to us by God. This is what the Kabbalists, well, in English, what we would call the Kabbalistic doctrine of constant creation. By the way, Sandrine, in reference to volume 3 of this book, Lessons in Tanya, that you mentioned before, Shar Yichav Emunah, that section of Tanya, what the larger work of Tanya, that's where this idea is really developed. The idea that the nature of this is not to exist, right? Because it wasn't always in existence. It didn't exist. So therefore, to make it exist requires a constant force to overwhelm the natural state of things, which is non-existence. In other words, when something already has a precondition and you modify it a drop, you don't need to keep holding on to it to make it exist. So if you take a piece of wood that exists and you form it into a chair, you don't need to keep on making it into a chair. You made it into a chair once, you walk away, it's done. Why? Because the wood preceded you and it exists after you. But when it comes to creation in totality, right, existence itself, the nature of existence is non-existence. Why do I say that? Because existence didn't always exist. It was only God who existed, right? Created existence is an anomaly. It's an aberration. It's weird. It's bizarre. It shouldn't be. There's no natural state that makes this happen. It's only God defying spiritual nature or the nature of infinity. It's only God defying what should only be God's reality to create this reality. Well, when you have something from nothing, when you have an existence that doesn't have a natural origin, but rather a supernatural origin, you need a force constantly keeping it into existence. I want to give you an example, and then we're going to jump into some new ideas. The example that I'm going to use is football. Now, why do I use football? Because it's football season. It's not baseball season anymore, right? It's the winter now. We're getting close to the winter, fall, winter. Football, also because I'm from Pittsburgh. And if you're following football, I don't know if you should or shouldn't. I'm just saying, if you do, you might know that the Steelers right now are 11-0 and undefeated. Now, how do I know this? Whatever, doesn't matter. But here's my point. The point is that you take a football, right? And it's laying on the ground. You pick it up and you throw it into the air. So did the football become a flying football? Did the football transform its nature from being inert, right, just sitting, to becoming a flying football? In other words, imagine you have two footballs. One is sitting on the field, one is on the ground, and the other one's flying through the air because someone threw it. Are you going to say now there's two types of footballs? There are footballs that are at rest and footballs that fly? Of course not, because the flight is not its own. It's not flying because it flies. It's flying because it's been hurled into the air. It's been thrown into the air, which means that it requires a force to defy its nature, its gravitational pull. And that means that the moment the force dissipates, the moment the force of being thrown into the air ceases, right? The moment the force is less than the force of gravity is the moment it starts falling back to earth. And then it falls down to the ground, and there it sits until someone chooses to pick it up again and throw it. The point is that this world, this creation, this life is kind of like a football being thrown into the air. But it's not flying on its own, and it's not alive on its own. There's a constant force that needs to create it. And therefore, our very life, the breath that you're taking right now, The inhale, the exhale, your heartbeat, right? Contraction, expansion. Everything that's going on in your life right now, physiologically, biologically, right? Chemically, everything that's happening in your life right now to make you alive is being powered by God, chosen by God for you to exist in this moment. There's nothing that is happening by default. Everything is a constant re-energizing, it's God breathing life into us once again. So we talk about gratitude and we talk about feeling the love. When we feel God's love, we can't help but love God back. How do we feel God's love? The Exodus. Too long ago. The Torah. Okay, still a little bit spiritual. Your life right now. Now we're talking. You with me on the progression? Yeah. The whole point of this idea is that we love God because God shows so much love for us. How does God show that love? The first thing we talked about is the Exodus. Then we said, what's in more modern terms? The Torah, which we still use and helps us escape all the material challenges. But on an even more basic level, our very life and existence is divinely ordained, not only ordained, divinely infused at this moment. So this is essentially what chapter 48 is doing. It's exploring how it is that we exist and how it is that there's a constant force that makes us exist and powers our existence, which is what we are to be grateful for. So let me look at the chat. I think I saw some things come in. Dung Hill, thank you. Adina Malka wrote, God created in 7 days and rested, or constant creation. Excellent. Excellent question. We talk about God resting on Shabbat. Sounds like he's not creating. So no, shouldn't everything go poof? Excellent question. Kabbalah deals with this question. The Kabbalists ask this question. If God is resting, no, so now what? So the answer is God is only resting on one dimension, but on another dimension, he's still creating. So there's always, what we call panemius and chitzonius. There's always like the inner dimension and the outer dimension. So on an inner dimension, there's still creation happening. On an outer dimension, creation is not happening. Let me give you an example. Simple example. Imagine an artist whose whole life is creativity. But you can also imagine that artist might also need to sometimes take a break from creating. Yes? Sometimes the artist has to not be painting in order to kind of get new, fresh ideas and then go back to the studio, right? So when the artist is not painting, would you say the artist is not creating? Well, externally, the artist is not creating, but internally, there's a lot of creative thoughts that are happening. So on Shabbat, God doesn't create on the most external level, but internally, creation is still being powered. And not only is it still being powered, it's being powered on an even higher level and a deeper level than it is normally. It's kind of like, well, I mean, I think the example that I gave is a pretty decent example. There's what's more creative, kind of like when the artist is there with the canvas, or when the artist is kind of in their own space, imagining the possibilities of what that art could look like. One could argue that the creativity is even greater. There's more creation happening when the artist is not physically putting, paint on canvas. Again, just different ways to look at it, but it's an excellent question. Okay. So last time, when we started chapter 48, we spoke about the process of tzimtzum, which you and I love because it's got a great name, tzimtzum, right? Who doesn't love that? It's like Tintin. Remember Tintin? Who remembers the kids' book Tintin? Anybody? Sandrine. Good. Wait, wasn't Tintin French? Oh, no, that's asterisk. Is asterisk French?
Both. I don't know
Both are
about
French.
Tintin is Tintin in French, but spelled the same, is Belgium. I mean, he was created in Belgium.
Oh, Belgium, right. Okay. Yeah, but you know what, for us Americans, honestly, in America, it's all the same. I mean, it's all generally
Europe.
the same. It's Europe. It's whatever. Is the
No,
New
but
Yorker
Asterix is definitely
cover about
French.
that. Yeah, it's close. Anyway, so here's the deal. So last time we spoke about Tzimtzum, and we've discussed Tzimtzum many times in many classes. It's the art of divine contraction. It's how the light, the infinite light, is lessened and lessened and lessened and lessened until finite creation can exist, which, by the way, that's also a form of love. Think about it. Think about it. God is putting in the effort, taking the time to condense himself, to contract himself, to give you and I life. That's love. You know, I always use Einstein as an example, because like who more brilliant than Einstein? Imagine Einstein takes the time to explain to a 5-year-old a concept in science. He didn't have to. He didn't have to. He's all the way up there, but instead he chose to take the light and bring it down, 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 down. Stephanie, yes, God created for 6 days and rested on the seventh. That was Adina Malka's question. She asked, so if God rested on the seventh, so how does the world, why didn't it go poof? That's why I explained that there was the act of creation, the external manifestation of creation was happening on the 6 days. On the seventh day, there's no outward. You don't see the creation externally, but internally, even with the rest on the seventh day, there's still creativity happening. Back to Tzimtzum. So it's like Einstein, who loves the student, the child, to the point that he's going to put in the effort, so to speak, to condense, contract until he gets a point that can be delivered to the child, to the small pupil. God is shining his light upon us to create us constantly, and doing so in a way that cuts the light down to the size that we can handle it. You and I, our bodies could not contain infinite light. Infinite light I'm saying the body, not our souls, right? Your body, your physical body could not contain infinite light. It would go, I mean, it couldn't. It would short circuit. It can't. It's too much light for too small of a container, too finite of a container. So what does God do? God cuts the light. And it's not only you and I, the body, it's a blade of grass, right? It's a tree, it's a rock. A rock has a soul also. Everything in existence has light and energy that's constantly creating it and recreating it. And that light is cut down, contraction, limitation, until it can fit and power that living being. That's an act of love. That's like the king leaving the palace, the place of grandeur, and going down, 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 down to the dunghill to give life, to bring life back to this guy who was cast away. God takes his infinite light down, 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 down to give you and I life when we don't have to be. God chose to have us and to grant us life and to gift us life. And it's not just once upon a time when we were born or when we were conceived. It's every moment of every single day that we're alive. This process is happening again. It's like the football. If it's flying in the air, there's a force propelling it, right? So as long as we're here, as long as anything is here, if it's here, it's being powered currently by God. So let's jump in. And I wrote in the email tonight, we're going to explore imagination, which we are. So just hang on for that conversation. Let me just make sure that everybody is on. Yes. Okay. I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully this short intro has made sense thus far. We're about to jump into some new text. Okay. Finding out where I'm finding the place where we ended off last time. Here we go. I'm going to start from over here, from this so, indeed. Now it's kind of in the middle of a point, but I'm going to kind of reset wait, did I share my screen? Did I share my screen? I did, right? Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to set up this sentence, and then we're going to read it inside. What he said was, and we did this at the end of last session, is that relative to God's infinite power, the finite light that's contracted, condensed to fit into the blade of grass or the tree or the person or the rock, that light that got cut, so that now it's powering, right? It's powering that thing. So that light and energy relative to the infinite source is incomparable. How could you compare that finite, flow of energy and life force into that one thing to the source of all life, which is infinite? You can't compare it. So he says, let's continue. Let's pick it up over here. So indeed is the utterly insignificant quality of this minute illumination after the contraction, which clothes itself in the higher and lower worlds in order to provide them with sustenance and life, when compared with the quality of the hidden and concealed light that is of an infinite order. What he says here is that the minute illumination, which the terminology that I used was the very finite, I don't remember exactly how I said it, but the very reduced measure of light and life force that goes into every created being on its level. So that minute illumination, which is post Tzimtzum, which is after the contraction, right? That clothes itself. In other words, it goes into the world, whatever it is, whether it's an angel, whether it's a soul, whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, whether it's a rock, whether it's a higher world or a lower world, they're all finite. Even the higher worlds are still finite realities, spiritually finite. They're not infinite. Only God is infinite. So anything that's a world is finite. So the minute illumination that goes either in the higher world or the lower world, either way, it's incomparable. It's insignificant, utterly insignificant relative to the hidden and concealed light that is of an infinite order. So relative to the light as it was originally, this light is garnished. It's nothing. It's nothing. It's incomparable. By the way, this is not to make fun of the light. This is simply to bring out how low God stoops down, so to speak, to give us light. Are you with me on what I'm saying? It's just trying to express how low God's light descends, just for what purpose? To give us what we need. It's incredible. Let's continue. He says another point. This infinite light does not clothe itself or exercise its influence in the worlds in a revealed manner, providing them with life, but rather encompasses them from above, i.e., and this is the commentary, it exerts its influence while remaining on its own level. And this is called Sovev Kol Almin, which is a Kabbalistic term that means literally encompassing all the worlds. What I need to do now is stop the share for a second and tell you there's two forms of divine energy. There's Mamale Kol Almin and Sovev Kol Almin. There's the divine light and energy that goes into the created being to give it life. And then there's the higher light, the more infinite light that influences from the outside and not from the inside. Give an example. A king. We don't have kings, so it's hard to relate to this example. But in the times when Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy were being, mainly articulated, many of them lived in countries that had kings. So you find a lot of time parables of kings and princes and whatever. So here's an example of a king. How does a king rule? How is it possible that one person could rule millions of people? Doesn't make sense. If you think about it, it doesn't make sense. How could one person tell millions of people what to do? How do they have the power to do so? You're going to tell me it's the military, it's the this, it's the that. Doesn't make sense. Why is the military listening to one person? It's mishagas, it's craziness. How does one person, how do they do it? So I'm not about to share the psychology of it per se, but I do want to tell you that how does a king rule? A king rules in two ways. One, by edict, and one, by reputation. On the one hand, the king rules by virtue of various laws that are passed that affect the people of the kingdom, right? You have to do this, and you can't do that, and you have to pay these taxes, and you have all these rules. And then you have, of course, layers of governance and enforcement to make sure that the rules are being followed. That's one form of rulership. But then that's not one form, that's one aspect of the king, of the king's rulership. Then you have another aspect, which is the reputation of the king. Even if the king doesn't issue an edict, even if the king never told you what to do, what not to do, there would still be a fear, an existential sense of awe and fear and reverence for the king. Where does that come from? The reputation. What's the reputation? How do you quantify? How do you qualify? Not qualify. How do you quantify reputation? Where does it come from? Why is a reputation? Where is a reputation? It's hard to like put your finger on it. But nonetheless, there is this thing called reputation. It's a thing. In the Hebrew, it's called kind of like the shame, the name, not shame, S-H-A-M-E, but shame like in Hebrew means name. It's the name of the king instills fear. People hear the king, they start trembling. Why? The king's not here. You're hearing the name of the king and you're shaking. What are you shaking about? What are you scared about? It's the king. What? The king ever screamed at you? Yelled at you? What are you shaking? Why are you getting nervous? The king, it's the king. What does that mean? It's the king. It's an intangible. Now go tell us, living in a democracy, right? It's a weird, you and I, maybe we can't relate to this example. What does it mean to shake in your boots at home because you heard about something about the king? It's weird because, like we're an irreverent people, like kings, right? King schming, right? Whatever, come back to me later. Yeah, what have you done for me lately? But like back in the day, there was a fear. I'm using this as an example to explain the difference between Memale Kolaman and Soviv Kolaman. Memale is the influence that operates from the inside, and Soviv is the influence that operates from the outside. So the inside influence is like the king issues a decree, the king tells you what to do, that affects your life. But then he didn't even tell you what to do. Just the notion of the king affects you. That's from the outside. It's not like an internal effect, it's an external effect. Give you another example. When you're in a class studying Kabbalah, for example, so there's two ways to study. One way is to understand what's being taught. That's working on the inside. And then there's sensing, the second way is sensing that there's something big happening. That's operating from the outside, right? So if you get it, if you understand it, then it's operating from the inside. If you don't, but you sense that there's something, majestic, magnificent, that's how it's operating from the outside. So what I'm trying to say is, even without going inside, something can still have an effect. You understand what I'm saying? Even if it doesn't permeate in the inside, even if something is not contained by the other, it still can have an influence from the outside in on its own terms. One more example. One of my favorite examples, as you probably have noticed over the past whatever number of years of studying with me. The idea of light always operates from the outside in, never from the inside out. What do I mean by that? You turn the light on in a room, you leave it on for 10 hours, and you turn it off. You know what happens? The room is dark. You know why? Because the room never absorbed the light. And I know what you're thinking. Glow-in-the-dark stickers. Yes, glow-in-the-dark stickers are different because they did absorb the light. But typically, the room does not absorb the light. That's why when the light is turned off, the room is dark, as though the light had never been shining. Because even when it's shining and influencing, it's not really influencing. It's only operating from the outside. It's only operating from an encompassing space, not an internal space. It's the difference between, hopefully, educating and turning on a light bulb. Hold on. Give me a second to explain. Students walk into a classroom and there's light and there's a teacher. Two things in the classroom. There's light and there's a teacher. After an hour studying with the teacher, the students walk out. You know what they took with them? They took with them the wisdom. You know what they didn't take with them? The light bulb, right? Hopefully, right? They didn't take the light. You walk out of the room and the light's not with them. The light's still there because the light never was internalized. But hopefully the teaching, the education was internalized. My point is, again, I don't want this to be too complicated. Point is very simple. Things can have an influence in one of two ways, either on the inside or on the outside. Kabbalah calls these two forms memale kolamin, that which fills the worlds from the inside out. In other words, it permeates. It's the divine life force that gives life to reality from the inside, from within. Versus Sovev Kolamin, the transcendent light of God, which gives life force to the world from the outside in. It overwhelms it almost into being, but it doesn't actually work with it from the inside. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the spelling. So here we go. Sovev Kolamin is right here. I'm highlighting it. Okay, you see that? Sovev Kol Almin, which means that's the encompassing light. And then you have over here in this shaded box, Memale Kol Almin. That is the penetrating light. You have the encompassing light that works from the outside, and then you have the penetrating light that works from the inside. So let's continue inside because I still want to get to a lot of things. So let's continue. The meaning of this, of the phrase Sovev Kol Almin, encompassing the worlds, is not that this light encircles and encompasses from above spatially, God forbid. For in spiritual matters, the category of space is in no way applicable. So this doesn't mean that this level of light actually surrounds the worlds in a way that's literal. Let's just picture planet Earth. Like here's planet Earth, and this, infinite light or transcendent light is encircling the world like that. No. Don't get spatial on spiritual concepts. Don't mix space with spirit. Rather, he says, the meaning is that it encircles and encompasses from above insofar as the revelation of this influence is concerned. In other words, it's not spatial, it's in reference to its influence. For influence, which is in the category of revelation in the worlds, is referred to as investiture. In other words, for something to influence, it has to be invested within. For the divine light to influence, it has to be influencing from the inside out. In other words, this is the light that's being clothed within the worlds. For the influence that they receive is clothed and comprehended by them. Whereas, that's Mamali Kalaman. Whereas the influence which does not come within the category of revelation, but remains obscured and concealed and is not apprehended, not understood, or not grasped by the worlds, is not described as being invested in them, but as encircling and encompassing them. Very, very simple analogy that I gave before. You have 10 students in the room, and the teacher is teaching. and 5 students get it, and 5 students don't get it. So Kabbalah would say, using this terminology, in 5 students, the light or the wisdom went inside, and for the other 5, it encompassed them from the outside. In other words, it didn't go inside. It wasn't comprehended. It wasn't received by the recipient and contained by the recipient. It rather remains aloof, not physically. It's not like the words of the teacher are like somehow like in a bubble around the person. No, they heard it, right? It hit their brain on some level, but it went over their heads. We call that encompassing light. The point is that God shines 2 forms of light on us. There's the light that's been cut down to fit us, that goes inside of us and influences us from the inside. And then there's the big light that God does not cut for us, but that also influences us from the outside in. Let's continue. Therefore, since the worlds belong in the order of the finite and limited, in other words, since our reality is finite, it follows that only an extremely minute and contracted reflection of the flow of the infinite light of the blessed Ein Sof clothes and manifests itself in them in a revealed form. Right? So we talked about 2 forms of light. There's the light that's cut down to size to fit inside, and then there's the light that operates from the outside. Forget the light that's on the outside. Let's talk about the light that's on the inside. To fit into a finite and limited world, which is the way he described our reality in that sentence, requires that the light be cut down into an extremely minute reflection. It has to be cut down to very minuscule size. I'm going to give you a very simple example. You're building a robotic, I don't know, you're building a car, like a robotic car or something. You're building it from scratch, and now you need to power it because it needs to move. There's a motor, it needs to turn. You can't plug in a motor from an airplane to power your little hobby car. It's not going to work. It's too much energy to fit into your car. You have to get the right size battery, the right size energy pack to give just the right amount for your motor to turn. If you plug in, you have a little motor, right? Back in the day, maybe you get it from Radio Shack. Now where? Who knows? Amazon, right? So you get that little motor, and you plug in, the fighter jet engine, or, well, okay, you plug in a Tesla battery pack to your little motor. The motor is gonna it's gonna blow. It's not gonna work. It's got to be cut down. So the world's, our reality is finite and limited. Therefore, an extremely minute and contracted reflection of the flow of the light has to happen in order for it to go inside. By the way, for the light that shines from the outside, it doesn't need to be cut. But the one that goes inside has to be cut down to size. And this is only to animate them in a finite and revealed state. So this light is cut in order to work with it on its level and give that thing life and vitality in a way that's commensurate to its reality. But he says the principal light that is without contraction to such an extent is called makif, encircler, and sovev, encompasser, since its influence is not revealed within the world in as much as they belong in the order of the finite and the infinite and the limited. So again, 2 forms of light. The light that's cut down to size in a big time fashion to fit inside the container. And then there's the light that's not cut down so much and remains aloof. It's the encircler, the encompasser. Let's go. Let's keep on going. To illustrate this point, consider, he says, this material world, this physical world. Even though the whole world is full of God's glory, namely not only with the minute glimmer of godliness, but with the infinite light of the blessed Ein Sof. So what he says here is the whole world, our world, is filled with infinite light. As it is written, do I not fill heaven and earth? He says, no, 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 no. Nevertheless, only very limited vitality of no more than the category of what is revealed in the inanimate and vegetable worlds is clothed within this world in the form of revealed influence. So yes, God is everywhere, but what actually vitalizes and vivifies and animates, what actually gives life to our physical reality, it's only a very limited measure of divine vitality. And that is what is clothed within the world in a revealed manner. While all the light of the blessed Ein Sof, the rest of the infinite light, which fills the world in a concealed manner, is described as encompassing it, even though it actually pervades it. Listen, hopefully this is not too contradictory. What he's saying is, God is here, but we don't see God. What do we see? Nature. That's all you need to know. We don't see God, we see nature. What is nature? God cut down to size so that we understand it. But where is God? Also here. But we don't understand God because God's too big to fit into the container. So you look at a tree. I'm going to speak in very simple way. You walk outside and you see a tree. And you say, okay, the tree is alive. It's growing. Its leaves are turning color. Whatever, it's alive. The tree's alive. So what does that mean? There's a life force flowing through it. Listen, you don't have to call it God. I'm going to call it God, right? God, there's a divine life force flowing through that tree, right? Which is why, by the way, not only does Judaism teach us to be careful when consuming animals, but it also tells us to be careful when compromising trees. The Torah says if you're in war and you need wood, don't cut down a fruit tree. There's a prohibition of cutting down a fruit tree. If you have a garden, if you have a backyard, whatever, to cut down a tree that bears fruit is a very, very tricky proposition in Jewish law. Now, every tree is alive, but one that bears fruit, it gives even more blessings. But here's my point. I got carried away with that example. All right, let's get back to the core example. You walk outside and you see a tree, and the tree is alive. So how is it alive? It's alive because there's a godly life force that's giving it life. Great. Guess what? That life force that's in the tree, when you look at the tree and you see the tree is alive, you don't say, oh, I see God. You see, I see a live tree. You know why? Because God took his infinite light and cut it down, 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 down until it fits the tree. So that when you look at the tree, you know what you see? You see a live tree. You don't see God. That's how cut down, that's how much tzimtzum happened to that light, that you no longer even see it as divine. You just see it as, yeah, the tree's alive. A blade of grass is growing in your yard. Oh, that's a blade of grass. You don't see God? No, I see a blade of grass. That's because the divine light was cut down, 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 down until it fit into that blade of grass and works from the inside. And now all you see is a blade of grass that's alive. But you and I know that that life ultimately came from God. But it's cut down and it's enclosed inside the grass, inside the blade of grass, that all you see is the grass being alive. But then, of course, doesn't mean that God is absent from the world. God gives life to every being on that level, but God is also here, but we can't see God. You know why? Because he's over our heads. It's too big to get, but God's here. It's like the teacher that doesn't do a good job of tzimtzum, that doesn't bring it down to the student's level. What were the students not in the room? They didn't hear the teacher speak. They did, but they don't understand it. They don't get it. So God is here. We don't get God, but we do get God in the form that God cut himself down, so to speak, to fit into the blade of grass and the tree and the animal and us. We're alive because God, there's a divine energy, which we call the soul, flowing through us. But that divine energy has been cut down, tailored to fit inside us, the container, to work within us on the inside. That's what we see. But God in his pure truth, uncompromised truth, it's too big. That's because it's not cut down to size, to our container. It's too big to see, but it doesn't mean God's not here. It just means that it's over our heads. That's what he's saying here. Let me jump back into the text. Let's do a little bit more text. I'm hoping we can get to the imagination, but we might not. So there's some of the light is cut down to size, and that's what's revealed influence. You see the life of that thing. Now, you don't know that it's God, maybe, but at least you see the life in that thing. However, while, on the other hand, all the light of the blessed Ein Sof, the infinite light, uncut infinite light, which fills the world in a concealed manner, is described as encompassing it, even though it's here, even though it pervades it, but we don't get it. Since its influence, why is it called encompassing? Since its influence is no more revealed in it than it is revealed within the inanimate and vegetable worlds, but affects it in a hidden and concealed manner. In other words, we don't see it, but it affects us. And any influence of a concealed nature is referred to as encircling from above. For Alma de Itkasya, which is the hidden world, is on a higher plane than Alma de Itkalya, the revealed world. So that which is hidden typically is coming from a higher source. That's why it's hidden. Whereas that which is revealed is coming from a lower source. In other words, the life of the tree that you see is the life that's been cut down to size to fit the tree. The life that you don't see is the infinite light of God that's really giving it life. So which is really, oh, hey there. Hey, come join us for the final hurrah. Very exciting, very excited to join us, Riva. So in truth, hey Riva, say hi. In truth, both levels, both dimensions are giving everything life. The infinite light from the outside and the finite light from the inside. Kabbalah says the infinite light does most of the heavy lifting. But what do we see? What can we relate to? Only the finite light. Does that make sense? In other words, what really gives the tree life is God. But what do we see? The life that courses through the leaves, the life that courses through the branches. All we see, all that's perceptible is the light that's been limited. But what does the heavy lifting of existence, of creation, is the infinite light that we can't see because it's not cut down to our size. And this we get to imagination. If you'll indulge me, let's do another 5 minutes. I know we're past the time. Let's do 5 minutes because I wrote in the email that we're going to talk about imagination and we're right up to imagination. I don't want to leave it up to imagination to imagine what I meant, to do tonight. Let's make it a reality. Let us make this more intelligible. And let's understand this better by means of an example. When a person forms an image in his mind of something that he has seen or sees, I want to do this. I want to give you an example. Picture a red tricycle. Can you picture it in your mind? A red tricycle. Good. Now we have something that we're going to work with. So even though the entire body and essence of that thing, both its exterior and interior and its very core, are completely mirrored, not mirrored, I don't like that word, are completely imagined, depicted is better, depicted in his mind and thought, for he has seen it or is seeing it in its entirety. This is expressed by saying that his mind encompasses that object completely, and that thing is enveloped by his mind and thought. So let me explain. I gave you an example, the red tricycle. So all of us have seen, I think, a red tricycle before, right? So imagine the red tricycle. You can close your eyes for a moment and picture it in your mind. Picture it as you walk around the red tricycle, 3 dimensions. Picture it, picture it, picture it. It's got the handlebars. It's got the little strings from the handlebars. It's got maybe a little horn, like a rubber horn or a bell, a metal bell. And it's got, red chrome or spray painted metal, and it's got a white seat right? It has a bar in the back. Picture the tricycle. If you really picture it, there's nothing missing. Nothing. You got the whole image in your mind. It's encompassed. Your mind encompasses the object completely, and that thing is enveloped inside your mind. However, but it is not encompassed in actual fact. You don't actually have a tricycle in your head. You have the image of a tricycle in your head, but the actual tricycle is not in your head. If you have a physical tricycle in your head, we got to talk, right? You have the image of a tricycle, but not the actual reality of a tricycle in your mind, right? It's not encompassed in actual fact, only in the imagination of the person's thought and mind. God, however, when it comes to God, of whom it's written, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. In other words, God's mind works differently than ours. His thoughts and his mind, which knows all created beings, encompasses each and every created thing from its head to its end, from top to bottom. It's inside and its very core, all in actual reality. When God imagines us, it's not our image. It's not an imagination of us. It's actually us. We all exist in actual fact, literally inside God's imagination. For example, in the case of the orb of this earth, think about the globe, this earth globe. His knowledge, God's knowledge, encompasses the entire diameter of the globe of the earth, not the concept. God doesn't imagine. You and I picture planet Earth. God doesn't picture planet Earth. The actual planet Earth is inside his knowledge, together with all that's in it, all that's in planet Earth, and its deepest interior to its lowest depth, all in actual reality. Actual reality. For this knowledge, the knowledge of God, constitutes the vitality of the whole spherical thickness of the earth and its creation ex nihilo. What he's trying to say is, how do you get a tree in the first place? How do you get planet Earth in the first place? It's only by God imagining it as such. It's God's imagination that makes it be. That's larger than life. That's the encompassing light, the infinite light that we're speaking of. It's a product of the infinite light or the infinite imagination of God that produces in actual reality all living beings. That's the infinite light and the influence that it has. However, it would not have come into being as it is now as a finite and limited thing with an exceedingly minute degree of vitality, sufficient for the categories of inorganic matter and vegetation, were it not for the world being created through the many powerful contractions which have condensed the light and vitality that is clothed in the orb of the earth, so as to animate and sustain it in its finite and limited status and in the categories of inorganic and vegetable matter alone. We're going to stop here, right over here, which focuses again on God's knowledge. But here's the main thing that I want to do, that I want to make sure that we walk away with. There are two forms of divine influence. One that works from the inside, and one that works from the outside. The one that works from the inside is the divine light and energy and vitality that is cut down to size, that is trimmed and limited and contracted to the point that it flows through the arteries and the veins and the whatever it is, the atoms, the molecules of that thing. But then you have the very existence of existence, which is powered not by a finite measure of light, but by the infinite creator himself. Because like we did the exercise with the tricycle, when we imagine the tricycle, we're not making the tricycle. We're making it appear in our minds, but we're not actually making it. But God's imagination, God's infinite imagination, actually makes the tricycle and makes the road and makes the city and makes the planet. It's God's, right, Riva? Mm-hmm. Riva's nodding. Yes? Yes. It's God's imagination. And not, I don't mean imagination like a fantasy. It's God's mind, which is what we're about to say inside. I cut it right here. But God's knowledge, so to speak, God's imagination and God's essence are one. So what we're talking about is an infinite light of God that actually propels everything into being and sustains and creates the foundation for everything to be. And then to actually animate it, that's where the tzimtzum, the finite light, comes in, which means, to clarify, there's two things that happen from God. One is the very existence of existence, and then the nature of every particular form of existence. So the fact that it exists comes from the infinite energy of God, infinite light. The fact that it exists like a tree, like a blade of grass, like a rock, that's a product of the finite light and energy of God. Does that make sense? So the concept of existence is from the infinite light. The nature of existence comes from the finite light. Make sense? Yes? Sort of? In other words, creating something from nothing is an infinite trick from an infinite God, from an infinite light. Once you have something from nothing, to define and articulate that something, exactly how it's going to be and how small it's going to be and how big it's going to be or how defined it's going to be, that's another layer of light. That's a layer of light. Getting back to the king example, the fact that the kingdom is a kingdom with a king and a people, that's reputation. The particulars of what the people are supposed to do, that's where the laws come in. The reputation is what holds the whole country together. It's the laws that govern the particular behaviors of the individuals on a day-to-day basis. But there's two realities. So too it is within the world. There's creation itself. That's from the infinite power of God. Only God in his perfect, pure infinity can create something from nothing. That's an infinite ability. But once you have the elemental base building blocks of existence to define specifically what this thing is going to look like, that's already the limited force of God. But what's the whole point? It's what I said at the beginning of the class. The fact that we exist, the fact that we're breathing, the fact that our bodies work like this and not like that, in a good way, right? Our bodies work like bodies and not like trees, God forbid, right? All of that is a product of God influencing us, whether it's from the outside in or from the inside out, whether it's the infinite light influence or the finite light's influence. Either way, it reflects and expresses God's love for us. God cares enough about us to bring us into being and to keep sustaining us at every moment. Meditating on that fact should allow us to explode in love for God. Because if God loves us so much to give us life, how could we not feel a love toward God as well? All right, thank you for joining me tonight for part 2 of chapter 48 of Tanya. I hope tonight's class made sense. I hope it was, at least some of it went inside and didn't remain encompassing. And I hope it will have an influence. But both actually have an influence, as we saw. One is the basic existence, and one is the particular existence. Either way, I hope tonight was meaningful. And again, it's all about the love. God did all of this for us. So how could we not feel a reciprocal love if we only meditate on the blessings that we have, even for a little bit? Not a deep meditation, just an awareness. All right, I saw a few things came into the chat. Let's see. Yes, we don't see electricity, but we see its effect. Yeah, very good. Yeah. Dina Malka writes, I am a thought in the mind of God. Yes. We are the tricycle. But here's the deal. That imagination, you like that line? We are the tricycle? Ariva laughed when I said that. All right, you're getting, Yes. Want to say hi? Are you tired? I think you're tired.
Hi, Eva. Your hair are so long.
Her hair is long. Yes. You need a haircut at some point, right?
No.
No. All right. Whatever. Then no. I mean, I'm not, whatever. I'm going with the flow here. Anyway, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is, yes, we are the tricycle. Planet Earth is the tricycle in God's mind. But unlike the tricycle in our mind, tricycle, you like tricycles? Unlike the tricycle, in our mind, we don't create it. God creates it with his mind, with his conjuring it up, makes it. But defining its particulars on an ongoing basis, that's the tzimtzum light. That's the finite light. So bottom line is, God loves us, and God loves us so much that he's giving us life right now. So let's pay it back. And let's feel something the other way also. Let's feel something, at least a measure of gratitude and love toward God. Steve aptly points out that we are starting the new cycle of Tanya this Shabbat. The reason is because this Shabbat, as I mentioned last night, is the 19th day of Kislev, which is the Rosh Hashanah of the Hasidic movement. It's the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, of Hasidic philosophy. It's the Rosh Hashanah, it's the new year of Hasidic study, including Tanya. So there's an annual cycle of Tanya study. Traditionally, it's studied a little bit every single day. And that cycle concludes the 18th day of Kislev, which is tomorrow, and picks up again on the 19th day of Kislev, which is the Shabbat. So it's very appropriate that we are studying chapter 42 of Tanya. So not chapter 42, chapter 48, but it's appropriate that we're studying Tanya just a few days away from this very special day for the author of Tanya, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. All right, excellent. Good. Great to see everybody. Adina Malka, Steve, Mark, Susan, Sandrine, Stephanie, Alex, Lisa, Joy, Jonathan. It's great to have you all here. If anybody wants to ask questions, fire away. Oh, before you do, speaking of firing away, that reminds me, next Saturday night, not this Saturday, next Saturday night, Shabbat Hanukkah. After Shabbat, we're going to be having a very special Cafe Chabad, virtual Cafe Chabad with real food. Pick up the food Friday and join us for the virtual program. We're going to have the chief engineer of Israel's Iron Dome. So Israel, of course, nice. Israel, of course, Israel has the Iron Dome missile defense system. And one of the chief engineers is going to be speaking with us live from Israel. His time, 3 or 4 a.m., our time, 8 p.m. And he'll be taking us behind the scenes and talk to us about modern miracles in Israel. Hanukkah celebrates the ancient miracles of the Maccabees. And this year, after we light our menorahs at home, gather around the table with your computer or your phone, with your device or your iPad, and join us for modern miracles inside Israel's Iron Dome with the chief engineer. It's a very special evening. And again, join us and you'll even get some latkes and donuts. We'll have them available for pickup, 2 locations, Toco Hills as well as Virginia Highlands. So you can pick it up conveniently. Delicious latkes, delicious donuts with applesauce and sour cream. You don't have to choose. You can have both. You can have it all this year. Usually you have to choose. 1 second. Ellie is asking the good question. Ellie is asking, is there a box that has enough for the whole family? Not just one person. Is there a family box? The answer is, I know the people that can make it happen. Ellie, we're going to hook you up with a family box, buddy. You got it. But each kit includes some good eats. And I'm not going to tell you everything. It includes also special surprises. All right.
Is it from EB Catering?
No, this is not from EB Catering. This is actually from Kosher Gourmet. They have a good selection. I've taste tested it. It's Rabbi Ari approved. Speaking of cooking with Rabbi Ari, this is cooking with Rabbi Ari approved. It's even Tanya approved. Whatever. The latkes are the encompassing light, and the donuts are the not the encompassing, the internal light, whatever that means. We'll have to figure it out. You'll understand it once you eat it. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question I
Yes.
know that for Chabad, for Bar and Bat Mitzvah, the kid learn part of Tanya by heart.
Yes. Yes.
How do you determine which part? Like, is it like the, like the parasha with the birth date, or?
Excellent question. There's one chapter in particular that's usually memorized, and that is chapter 32. Chapter 32 speaks about the mystical underpinnings of the mitzvah to love your fellow as yourself. What better chapter for a young man or woman to study than the one that speaks about getting along with the other person, which is a very practical mitzvah. It's chapter Lamed Bet 32, which forms the acronym LEV, which is heart. It's the heart of Tanya, and it's the one that speaks about love. That's the one that's traditionally done. Yeah.
And is it the age at when they learn Tanya?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to learn younger.
It's hard
because it's deep concepts. I mean, you could learn it. I mean, you could theoretically learn it at a younger age, but it's deeper. I mean, even at an older age.
Yeah.
Even after years of study, I'm saying for me, for example, like I've studied. Are you guys fighting over my lap? There's so much love to go around. There's so much hugging. Yes, you guys. Oh, unhappiness also abounds. All right. So here's the deal. Even after years of study of Tanya, do I understand it 100% every single depth of it? Of course not. There's still more to go. Guys, get in for the picture. Anyway, listen. So, but kids, look, kids are they're picking up whatever they can get. But yeah, it's usually studied around bar bat mitzvah age. That's when it kind of starts.
Rabbi, I don't understand about the red tricycle.
Wait, what? I didn't hear you. Sorry?
I do not understand about the red tricycle. The tricycle is physical, and then
Yes.
I'm imagining it in my mind. I can't relate that to God and the light.
So one second. When you imagine the tricycle, it's just an imagination, but it's not actually the tricycle. The point is that when God imagines the world comes into being. Not the imagination of the world, the actual world. In other words,
Tati.
yes.
So if he thinks in his head, it just came.
It just came, right? It would be cool if you thought in your head and you got something, right? Yeah, what would you think of?
I don't know.
You have to think about that. And maybe it'll happen. Anyway, yes, when God thinks of it, that's what actually makes it to be. Why? But how could that be? You know why? Because God is Ein Sof. God is infinite. God is all power. God could do anything, including create by thinking. So that's the point. The creation of something from nothing, out of nowhere, right?
Wait, that's a book, something.
Something from nothing, right? The creation of something from nothing happens from the Ein Sof, from the infinite light. But the nature, how it's defined, the nature of the tree versus the blade of grass versus the rock versus the bison, versus the person, as Reva says, all of that is determined or affected, influenced by the finite light. All right. I would love to stay on, but probably have to get these guys to bed, right? Yes?
No.
My crew.
Mommy left.
Mommy's, oh, mommy left?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess you guys are with me.
Eh.
Hey-o. All right, guys.
To make the excellent.
Okay. Good
Make it
night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye, guys. Have a good night. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Take care. We'll see you all. Thanks for joining tonight.
We're going somewhere.
All right, take care, everybody.